Hello everyone, welcome to my channel SW Metro official channel.
Finally, Kody signs over his properties to Robyn, then gets kicked out, and for a man who once prided himself on being the head of a vast plural family empire, the symbolism of that moment cannot be overstated, because this wasn't just about deeds, parcels of land, and signatures scrawled on legal documents. It was about a man who had spent years trying to control a vision that ultimately crumbled in his hands. And the irony of it all is that he thought handing everything to Robyn would secure his legacy, his last grasp at relevance, his last attempt to prove that one wife had been loyal enough to inherit his empire. Yet almost as soon as the ink dried, the same woman he trusted with the keys to his kingdom turned around and showed him the door, forcing him to confront a reality he had long denied, that his power, his charm, and his authority were no longer enough to hold together either a family or a marriage. And so the spectacle of Kody Brown, once the face of polygamous confidence on national television, walking away from a property he had given away, displaced from the very home he imagined would be his safe haven, became a tragic final act in a story that began with so much bravado. Kody had always been about land, from the early days when he dreamed of building on Coyote Pass to the countless speeches he gave about how the family's future rested on what he described as our kingdom. And for years, he weaponized that dream against his wives, promising homes that never materialized, holding the idea of acreage as a carrot to keep people invested in his leadership. But after years of fights, betrayals, breakups, and estrangements, the only person left standing beside him was Robyn. And so when he finally chose to redivide and sign over everything, he did it under the belief that she would be the one to protect him, that she would make sure no one else could claim his land, and that maybe, just maybe, they could still build the mansion he always promised. But life has a way of flipping scripts in ways even the most controlling figures cannot predict, and in Robyn's case, the signing represented not loyalty but liberation, a moment where she had the paperwork, the assets, the proof that she was now the legal owner of everything, and once she had that, the dynamic between them changed instantly, because she no longer needed Kody to access resources. No longer needed him as the father figure for her kids, no longer needed to smile through his erratic moods or endure his rants about how he was the misunderstood victim of plural marriage gone wrong. And so the day he walked into the county office to finalize the paperwork was also the day he unknowingly gave her the leverage to kick him out, leaving him stunned, confused, and increasingly desperate. In private, he tried to argue, saying the land was meant to be theirs, not hers alone, but Robyn was cold, pointing out that the documents said otherwise, that his signature was binding, and that after years of defending him while he alienated Mary, Christine, and Janelle, she was done being his shield, done being the last wife standing, and so she ordered him to leave. And for the first time in decades, Kody had nowhere to go, no wife's couch to crash on, no parcel to retreat to, no family compound to oversee, because he had systematically destroyed every relationship that could have offered him shelter. And the sight of him driving away in his truck, boxes piled in the back, hair blowing wildly in the wind, wasn't just a scene of eviction but a portrait of collapse, a reminder that power can disappear overnight when pride blinds a man to the consequences of his actions. The public ate it up, of course, because Sister Wife's fans had long predicted that Robyn would one day turn on Kody, and social media lit up with commentary about karma, betrayal, and poetic justice. Yet beneath the gossip and the headlines, the human tragedy was undeniable. Here was a man who had once orchestrated a household of 4 women and 18 children, reduced to wandering like an exile while the woman he trusted most slammed the door behind him. And in his mind, the betrayal stung not only because it came from Robyn but because he had believed until the last second that she was incapable of leaving him, that she was bound by a loyalty deeper than law, deeper than property, deeper than resentment. Yet what he failed to see was that loyalty had long ago turned into obligation, obligation into resentment, and resentment into cold resolve. And once the property was hers, she no longer had to play the part of the dutiful wife holding together the fragments of a crumbling dynasty, because she could finally imagine her life without him, imagine raising her kids without his constant bitterness, imagine controlling assets without the constant shadow of a man who always needed to be the center of attention. And so she acted decisively, proving that in the end, she had learned from watching the other wives leave, had seen how Christine walked away into happiness, how Janelle carved independence, how Mary found freedom in distance, and she decided to follow, not with a half-hearted attempt at reconciliation, but with a brutal act that left Kody broken, a legal victory and a personal betrayal rolled into one, and as the dust settled, the questions piled up. What would he do now? Where would he go? How would he explain to his kids that the land he once promised them was gone, and that the mother of their half-siblings had been the one to pull the rug out from under him? And in a cruel twist, Robyn didn't even try to soften the blow. She didn't meet him for one last heart-to-heart, didn't cry or wail or beg him to change, because she had already cried enough for years, and the act of telling him to leave was almost clinical, efficient, like crossing an item off a to-do list. And in that, she proved that she had finally detached, finally stopped believing in the myth of Kody as patriarch, and in doing so, she forced him into the position of a man stripped bare, with nothing left but the echoes of a dream that had crumbled into dust. Kody Brown, the patriarch of the polygamous family from TLC's sister wives, being effectively kicked out of the very home he had legally signed over to his fourth wife, Robyn, is not merely a dramatic plot point in a long-running reality television saga. It is the final, devastating act in a decades-long drama of spiritual betrayal, financial entanglement, and the catastrophic collapse of a family structure built on a foundation of shifting sand. This event, which appears on its surface to be a simple property transaction, is in reality the physical manifestation of a profound and tragic irony. Kody's lifelong pursuit of a unified family, governed by his absolute authority, was ultimately dismantled by the very favoritism and emotional manipulation he employed to maintain control, leaving him isolated, symbolically homeless, and a king dethroned in the castle he gifted away. To understand the seismic weight of this moment, one must first appreciate the intricate and deeply flawed financial and emotional ecosystem Kody cultivated over 18 seasons. The principle of the family was the sacrosanct, oft-repeated mantra, a spiritual concept meant to transcend individual wives and children. Practically, however, this translated into a complex and often contentious system of resource allocation. Kody, as the self-appointed CEO of the family, controlled the finances, with income from the show and various business ventures flowing through him before being distributed, unequally, as it would later be revealed, to the four households. Properties and assets were perpetually in flux, bought and sold in a whirlwind of moves from Las Vegas to Flagstaff, always under the banner of unity but often feeling more like a strategy to keep the family off balance and dependent on his decision-making. The wives, particularly the first three, Mary, Janelle, and Christine, made immense personal and financial sacrifices, often pooling their resources to support the entire clan, including Robyn, who joined the family in 2010 and almost immediately seemed to operate under a different set of financial rules. The cracks in this facade began as hairline fractures before widening into unbridgeable chasms. The move to Flagstaff, a decision seemingly rushed and emotionally charged, was a critical turning point. The failed one-house dream, a giant, single home to contain all four wives and their children, exposed the deep-seated divisions Kody had long tried to paper over. The other wives rejected it, seeing it not as a symbol of unity but as a prison for their unhappiness. This forced the family to purchase separate plots of land on Coyote Pass, a sprawling, undeveloped property that represented both a future dream and a present-day financial albatross. It was here that the inequities became impossible to ignore. While Janelle and Christine struggled to secure loans and build on their lots due to their financial independence from Kody, their names were not on all the assets with him. Robyn's situation was starkly different. She lived in a $1 million home, rented and then purchased, that was always conspicuously larger and more luxurious than those of her sister wives. The justification was often her need to house her children and tenders, the children from her previous marriage, but the disparity bred a resentment that festered for years. The COVID-19 pandemic acted as an accelerant, pouring gasoline on these smoldering resentments and exposing the brutal truth of Kody's priorities. His rigid, and at times paranoiac, rules for the family were ostensibly about health but functionally served to codify his preference for Robyn's household. He spent virtually all his time at her home, effectively moving in permanently while treating the other wives and their children as contaminated outsiders who needed to prove their loyalty to gain access to him. This was the ultimate betrayal of the rotational, equitable timesharing that was the bedrock of their plural marriage. Wives like Janelle, who questioned his authoritarian protocols, and Christine, who simply longed for a functional romantic partnership, were labeled disobedient and problematic. The man who demanded absolute loyalty gave his exclusively to one wife, abandoning the others emotionally, physically, and, as would soon be revealed, financially. This brings us to the fateful property sign-over. The exact timing and full legal details remain somewhat obscured for television, but the essence is clear. Under significant pressure and amidst the complete unraveling of his marriages, Kody took steps to remove his name from the properties owned with Meri and Janelle and signed over his portion of the Coyote Pass land to Robyn. On paper, this could be framed as a simplifying of assets during a divorce, a way to untangle the Gordian knot of their finances. But in the context of Kody's history and behavior, it reads far more cynically. It was the final, grand gesture of a man capitulating entirely to his favorite wife, securing her future and that of her children at the direct expense of the family pot that the other wives had contributed to for decades. He was effectively hollowing out the collective asset base, transferring it to the one wife who had contributed the least financially, while Meri was left with a barren lot on Coyote Pass and Janelle was left fighting for a fair share of the assets she had tirelessly funded. It was not a division of assets, it was an appropriation. The poetic justice, then, is exquisite and brutal. Having legally divested himself of ownership to prove his devotion to Robyn and perhaps in a last-ditch effort to maintain some control by simplifying his portfolio, Kody made himself a tenant in her home. He no longer held the legal deed, he held only the tenuous claim of a husband. And when the relationship between even them became strained, a development hinted at in the later seasons, showing Kody filled with rage, admitting Robyn doesn't respect him, and languishing in a state of depressed inaction, the power dynamic shifted irrevocably. The king had given away his crown. The provider had given away his provision. The man whose identity was built on control found himself with none. Being kicked out, whether literally shown the door or merely made to feel so unwelcome and emasculated that he could no longer stay, was the inevitable consequence. He had spent years emotionally kicking out Meri, Christine, and Janelle, isolating them until they chose to leave. Now, he found himself on the receiving end of that same cold reality, exiled from the last refuge he had, a refuge he no longer owned. The image of Kody Brown, alone in a rental apartment or wandering the vacant rooms of a house he once ruled, is the perfect coda to this story. He is a man defeated by his own design. His dream of a grand patriarchal legacy lies in ruins, not because of external forces or the failings of his wives, but because of the corrosive nature of his own favoritism, his inability to lead with true love and equity, and his catastrophic financial mismanagement. Signing over those properties to Robyn was the final, foolish act of a man who believed his authority was inherent and permanent. In reality, he was signing his own eviction notice, a document that proved that in the end, the only thing Kody Brown truly unified was the collective decision of his entire family to walk away from him, leaving him alone to contemplate the empty kingdom he built, and then so carelessly gave away.